So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the City Council Retreat for South Burlington, May 7th, 2025. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and there's a flag in the room. Jesse, will you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please give us the instructions on exiting the building in case of emergency and review of technology.
We're in reverse.
So you can go out the stairs to your right, or if you follow the hallway all the way down to your left, you can go down those stairs. There is a respite point at the top of those distant stairs as well. We have no one currently participating online.
So that would be just 3. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in the order of agenda items today, folks?
All good.
Can I add a quick city manager update, because I did do that on Monday night?
Sure. Okay, you want to do that where
Okay.
at what number 4.5?
Sure.
Okay, so we're gonna have 4.5. Item 4, comments and questions from the public, which there aren't any. So skip over that and we'll go to 4.5, which is an update from the city manager.
Thanks. So just a few quick updates for you all. We had more than 2,200 people come to Illuminate via the clickers, which is great for a big event turnout.
And for soggy.
Well, we had 1,400 one night and 800 the second night, but still, that's pretty
That
good.
night was cold,
Yeah.
windy, wet. Yeah.
How did that compare to last year, the previous year?
I think last year we were at around 1,700, so creeping up. We are now fully staffed in the clerk's office. I think I sent you a message about this before, that we had a big staffing transition, but Holly has hired 3 great people, so we are now back up to full staffing. So I was gonna share that the chief has talked to you in prior meetings about the new deployment model of the fire trucks and ambulances. And he reported to our leadership team this week that that's resulted in a 30% reduction in the first month.
30% for one truck, 50% on the other one.
In
Wow.
usage?
That's huge. Fabulous.
Now, it is, that's just taking a call volume in 1 month compared to call volume in next month. So, but I mean, it's an indicator of where we're going with it.
And that's really an efficiency gain by reason of the software.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Software and new deployment model.
Yeah.
No,
Yes,
the
yes.
deployment model was facilitated by software.
Couldn't do one without the other.
And there were no operational issues associated with that change?
There's always going to be nothing that's impactful to the public. I mean, I'd say people who are used to always having 5 people, people on my team are always used to having 5 people show up on an ambulance and carrying in the kitchen sink with them when they go in. Now we just yesterday implemented a small first in bag, and then they'll go back and get more resources if they need them. They're just working through this.
So does that obviously saves wear and tear on the equipment? Does that also save us overtime? Like what what are the savings?
Is it mileage or time?
It really is wear and tear on vehicle, wear and tear on people, and unit availability for the next run that comes in.
Okay, so it does allow us to cover more
calls.
potential calls.
Yes, right.
Because people not, so I mean, I'm sure you planned, Trump this in the city news, right? This is a direct result of the capital investment and
I'd really like about 6 months worth of data so that I can.
before you.
So that we can really paint the picture, apples to
that makes
apples
sense.
versus, kind of
Yeah,
a
you don't
month.
want it to be a statistical fluke.
Yeah.
So I have just one comment to add. It's fabulous. And when we have successes like this, I would really like us to find a way to broadcast them. You may want 6 more months to get data to really be able to say what the reality is. But the last announcement that went out about the new EVs saving $45,000. When we have empirical data like this to share successes, I think it'd be awesome for us to have a way to really put it out to the public so that they and see that we're actually doing
On
something.
that note, the city blurb said we got the new EVs, you have to go to the website and a little buried to find the cost savings, so.
Yeah.
I think it's just something to be aware of, it would be great to like pop that right out in front when the city presented the new EVs and we saved $46,000. You'll note that someone like put an angry face on that post that we got EVs, cause they probably didn't dig into the fact that it saved us money.
I just,
Well, I heard and understood, and we are trying to do that. I guess I also share it directly with you all, so you all can be the champions of that news.
Yeah,
Because
Okay.
us sending emails about it or press releases about it or talking about it ourselves is not as good as you all
Sure.
out talking to your networks as well.
absolutely, so I'm putting it out to everybody
City
that,
Councilor Corner.
yeah,
Yeah.
Or
Counselor
just
Corner.
talking to
Yeah.
people you talk
We
to.
don't like
Yeah.
that. We don't like that.
Yeah, but the city news goes out and the newsletter goes out from Parks and Rec and stuff like that, and when we have big wins, I think marqueing them, maybe it looks like you're tooting your own horn, but I think people see it and go, this is what we want our team to be doing.
So this data, is that something that's gonna be furnished to our data analyst for her to?
We will just run, this is basic enough that I can run it. I mean, it's pretty simple, it's, you know, I rely on Anna often to give me formulas, but
Okay.
yeah, I can, we can calculate.
But is this the kind of thing that she would wanna pull long-term and keep and sequester in her own systems for further analysis later on?
I would not think so. And all the data is there, right? So we have it all at some point in the future.
She could request it anytime she
Right.
wants.
Yeah.
Comes out as CSV files or?
Yeah. Exactly.
So a few other quick updates. Jake Burdick started this last the 21st as our new HR generalist, so we are now back up to full HR staffing. Thank goodness. Green Mountain Habitat for Humanity received a zoning permit for a duplex off Heinsberg Road last week, so I know that's an important partner to you all, so just want to highlight
Where is
that.
that?
Paul said, a new duplex off Heinsberg Road north of Kennedy Drive. I don't know the exact address. And then just heads up, we are doing a bit of a office move around in our city manager's suite on Friday. We're accommodating, you know, the new assessing, moving over to finance and the data team. So everyone's working, but everyone else is working on email and phones, but that office will be a little jumbled up. That's all I got. Thanks.
Can I give a quick update? Last night we had a celebration for Mark Bear, who's had 20 years on the Development Review Board.
wow.
So Dawn baked a cake, she brought it in, they had the present DRB, and I was able to get 3 former DRB mates when I was on with him, so we got Art Klugo and John Wilking came in, and so did Bill Stone. I couldn't get Jennifer Smith or Joe Randazzo, if you know him, or one more, Dave Parsons couldn't make it. So anyways, really nice, we were downstairs in that library conference room. And you know, we talked for about a half an hour and reviewed some of the projects that he worked on, and the fact that he was the chair during the hearings and the appeals of the permits for the methadone clinic, the Chittenden Clinic on Dorset Street across Maple City Hall. And he handled it so well. And the result was really good too, so.
And Paul is working on a resolution to bring to you at your next meeting, just honoring Mark's service.
Oh, that's what I was gonna ask, okay, so we do recognize like 20 years of service.
That's all I have. Anybody else have any updates or something you would? So then we will move on to number 5, which is discussion of emerging issues and planning for the upcoming FY26 policy priorities and strategies process. Go.
So I will just share by way of table setting, staff has done 0 preparation for this discussion, other than put together the cover sheet at your direction. We're happy to talk about anything you would like to talk about. I would suggest that if you are veering towards a vote on something, we have not warned any votes today. So that should probably be done in another meeting. And I would say if you're voting on something that is specifically kind of for municipal operation, that we should make sure we're involving our experts in advising you before you take those votes. But other than that, Steve and I are gonna quiet and listen.
So on April 10th, you did put together the the memo that listed all of the suggestions that each of us had. I see you've got it with you, Elizabeth. I didn't know if it made sense to just go through that line by line and discuss.
Sure. I'll make
or
a
if there's some
suggestion
other
that we each take one and we just go around, and if we have more time, we can go around twice or 3 times or, right?
Don't run out of time.
Right? Just
Yeah.
each take one and go around.
You have a hard stop at 3?
Yes.
Well, alphabetically, who goes first here by first name?
Andrew. Happy for the chair to start. I'll start.
I'm looking at you.
I'll start, okay. I mean, maybe I'll take role of council and how can we be more nimble as this may generate some discussion. So a couple of things, I guess. One thing that was very helpful to me recently, and I don't know, Steve, I hope it was helpful to you and perhaps to Bettina, was that you know, I met at Steve's request, and I applaud and appreciate that to chat about the fire and electrical suggestions that were gonna be presented to council. And I also met separately with Bettina to talk about the domestic hot water extension. And for me, those meetings outside of our regular council meetings were really helpful. Because I got a deeper understanding of what they were trying to do and their concerns and what they know, and they were able to, you know, kind of hear my concerns and kind of, you know, I used to phrase like, make the sausage out of the public eye a bit, right? Because sometimes it's not that healthy for the public to see debates that maybe don't necessarily need to happen. Yeah, maybe a misunderstanding or just people aren't, you know, sometimes you have to work things through, right? And sometimes it's healthier to work those things through, you know, in a private way, and then, you know, in public, now you have that understanding, you can move forward. And to me, those meetings, at least from my perspective, allowed me to move more quickly on those items when they came before the council and be happier and more comfortable with what was being presented. So I don't know if everyone does that or whether it's something we can do on a more regular basis. Like, for instance, the CCRP and I would have loved to have a discussion about all that information outside the council meeting, because there was so much there and so much to talk about, and those targets, when I saw them, like, what? But there are other examples like that of things that are presented to us in the council that for a first time, it's like, oh. And it would be really helpful, I think it would make us more nimble, so it would make me more nimble, I'll talk for myself, I guess. And I think make the process smooth, at least for me, to have more of those conversations kind of offline and outside of the rubric of a full public council meeting.
So I see, I appreciate that comment, and I see how your meetings educated you more about the subject matter before you got to the city council meeting. But the only way 5 of us could have that meeting with, you know, with Bettina or with you would be a fully warned meeting, I would suspect, right? And that would take more staff time. Is the problem, I mean, so I guess the question is, there could be 2 problems here. One, you know, we get our packet on Thursday, right? And so then we have our meeting on Monday. So and then there are a lot of questions are generated. Good questions.
Apparently,
Good
I'm the only
questions,
one
yeah.
that has
Yeah,
questions.
but I mean, so the question I have is, are those questions adequate to suffice for enough knowledge to feel like when we get into debate in city council that we don't
No,
look
well,
like we're.
for me, no. I mean, like, we had 2 good sessions, probably what, I don't know, 45 minutes each, like an hour and a half of talking back and forth, right? And sometimes you talk and things emanate from that conversation too, right? You know, like email questions could be still to be
Yeah,
constrained, right? So for me, no, it doesn't really take the place of what I thought were really good meetings, honestly.
And I'll throw in, this piggybacks on
No, go. We're really working hard to be quiet.
No, but no, I think we
Good
need.
luck.
We want the input also, but
Very painful 2 hours for you guys if you just don't. You'll just get out of control.
I was just gonna say, this piggybacks on the line that I had about communication between plan development and the city council, and when we see plans and and I know that there's a balance between not having too many chefs in the kitchen and cross-pollination. And I feel like it would be helpful from my perspective for there to be more cross-pollination in the process so that there is input during the development process. Not necessarily that I have a good idea, but Elizabeth might. We're all bringing different perspectives to what's going on. And when these plans are developed without any opportunity for that cross-pollination, I think opportunities are missed for synergies or perspectives that aren't in the chef's basket. And I don't know how to do that, but when a project that's being developed comes to us when it's at its almost fully developed form, it's a hard time to say, what about? Which I think if that can happen a little bit earlier, can hopefully not slow down the process, but give more opportunity for it to be fleshed out more comprehensively.
So let me make a hard suggestion, and I'm asking for input, which is, when staff is gonna propose an ordinance, just to start there, would it be possible to say, would any council members like to discuss this beforehand? Maximum 2, obviously, and it may be that it's straightforward, and it's like, no, that's fine. Or someone may say, you know what, actually, it would be really helpful to have a pre-discussion. Would that be too much work, and is that a process that we can institute?
So I'm happy to directly answer that question, but I
Yeah.
am aware that 2 counselors haven't weighed in on this yet.
Yeah,
Okay,
I would like to weigh in, and it's a mixed bag. I have selectively asked to meet with staff members on some topics that I felt like I needed more information. But I also have utilized that time, I think, really just with a lot of discrimination, understanding it's dedicated to 20% of the council, and it's something above and beyond what the staff's working on. I think I appreciate your comment, Lori, in that sometimes it does feel like we're being asked to take action on something that's fully baked. And I think the difference with that is, I know where I've sought out information, and I'll use the CPRPC thing as a specific example, is I knew that was an agenda item on the planning commission meetings several times. So if I couldn't sit in on the actual meeting, I went back and listened to the tape session. So that became the conduit to educate myself as to what was going on. Now, how I knew that was I had to look at the agenda. Nobody was sort of pointing to me, this is something that's going to come to council in the next month or so. So you might want to be listening in. That might be a way to fill that gap. The nimble part of it, I struggle a little bit with, because I think what you're saying, Andrew, is you want to accelerate being nimble the first time the council hears about it by backing into getting more information before an action's required. And I guess to me, that's back to the conversation we had early on, which is the first time council gets a big topic, we're not gonna take action on it, and we're gonna delay it at least 1 meeting, so we have time to absorb what's shared and ask questions and then act on it, maybe in the 2nd or 3rd meeting. The other thing I sort of go back to with all of this is we have a lot of committees who are charged with specific activities. So we're always gonna have to strike that balance of what are we charging a committee with, and sort of trusting the recommendations that come to us are already, whatever they are, 80 to 90% vetted. And we're hearing the best recommendation with an opportunity to ask our own questions and move that recommendation forward or send it back for a little more fine tuning. So I think all of that is part of the process right now. And I think the piece that I know has been most helpful to me is going back to the committee meetings that do discuss an issue before it comes to council and to understand what questions were asked then, you know, and that honestly has informed me fairly well, but that's my take on it. And I do think if we all are gonna want that additional information, it's another council meeting.
I guess I would add pretty much along the lines what Elizabeth said. You know, I do reach out to have meetings periodically, but I've seen it much more so at the beginning than later, further on as part of the onboarding process, which is quite overwhelming initially. But I just, as a point of reference, I sought out city council members from around us just to see what is the norm. And I guess it comes down to how we choose to run the city council. My broader perception, what I took away is, you know, there's a city plan that serves as a guide. It identifies the priorities, it identifies the taskings. You know, South Burlington in particular is staffed with an excellent group of professionals. We have a city manager that, you know, we have shown us time and time again that it can direct her team in a very sort of professional way. And I guess I always sort of saw the view of the city council as sort of the final decision makers to be sure all sort of perspectives are being kept in place. And, you know, the committees help inform us because the goal is to empower the committees, not to sort of micromanage them. And there's supposed to be sort of an independent additional thought perspective to what we hear from staff. And then they come to us with presentations. Yeah, I appreciate the looking forward because it tells me what are the things that I need to get smart on and who I can reach out to. And I think these videos are great. I sit in on meetings, regional meetings, and other ones that I'm not affiliated with just as an opportunity to educate ourselves. But I think the process for me more or less works if we get a view, and I think the additional of a clear recommendation from the city how to proceed and why. And then we basically get comments and there are cycles to go back and forth again. So my only concern is if we all, you know, we all can do it, but I would tend to think that if we all engage to be more as a part of the mechanics of creating the initial policies, you know, they're gonna get different views from each one of us who meets with them. And that's just gonna drag the thing farther out. I think part of the process in the public meetings is the idea to show that there may be different perspectives. And then for the city professionals to say, well, if you go this way or that way, these are the pros and cons, or these are the impacts. So I think we have to be careful about sort of trying to micromanage or inject too early on in the process. I just, broadly speaking, I don't sort of see that as the role of the city council, but, you know, ultimately it's whatever we decide.
I think what you wanted to say was that you don't want to be too nimble. Is that kind of what you wanted to
Yes,
say?
if we all try to be nimble early on, it's just gonna
If-
slow.
If you're too nimble, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud, if you're too nimble, then you don't get enough public discussion about the issue in front of the public, which is really the important thing, right? Is that, the nice thing is sometimes that when something comes to us and we're kind of surprised by some elements of it, right? Then the public hears that, not the fact that they hear that, but they hear those facts, right? And then those facts come out in the open and then we're openly discussing them. And, you know, and then we may not be able to make a decision that first time. So I don't know what kind of nimble. you
Yeah, I
want.
guess I will say I probably have a different perspective, Mike, than you have on our role.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not.
You know, not everything is a
would-
consent agenda, that's the thing.
Yeah, I would see us more than final decision makers. We're a policy-making body. I don't see us as, you know, passively making final decisions. I see us, my role, so when I campaigned on as a policymaker, we are a policy body. The ordinances and other things that come to us reflect a lot of policy that we have to consider. And yeah, we can debate in the public, we can, you know, and yeah. it's often hard when things are presented. There's inertia, right? There's mental inertia, there's inertia that happened by reason of getting something to the public that locks it in a bit more than it would have been had you hashed it out before the public, and it sometimes is not the best it can be because that process happened that way. So as a policymaker, I would love to be able to have an opportunity to frame, form, and discuss some of those things as often as I could before they get to that stage. Because sometimes it gets locked in. I mean, like the debate we had about the single family duplex and putting aside that it happened, right? We had this debate that we probably didn't even have to happen, right? So it's things like that. And honestly, I mean, things came up with the hot water thing similarly. And I think the way it came to us finally from Bettina was perhaps better than it would have initially. And so there are opportunities to make things better and to avoid that kind of lock-in effect.
I have a suggestion for how that could possibly happen. And I think I land more in the seat of wonder that I ran as a city councilor, as a policy person for the city and holding that responsibility. And when a project is being launched within staff, would it be possible or appropriate to just to send a memo out to us as council members saying, we are launching this initiative regarding whether it's single family houses, whatever it is, and we're working on this. If you have interest in this or have input, please feel free to send it to us so that we can have that in front of us when we're going through the work, so that we're aware of the positions that each of us are holding as you're doing your preparation. Not saying that mine is better than Mike's or otherwise, but just so you have the best informed information in front of you when you sit down to do that work. And it would enable you guys to have the flavor or the temperature of what is important in the council and maybe be informed about something that hadn't even come up in your minds in the development process that would be useful to have on the table as you're going through the process.
But I can just suggest that, you know, Andrew, we're all policy, we're all elected, we all ran on a platform, we all expressed what our views were, and this is what ultimately allowed all of us to have the pleasure and the great responsibility and opportunity to serve the city as city council. But again, it's about the, you know, the process itself, you know. All of us can individually speak with whichever staff person. Let's just call Paul, because Paul seems to be involved in everything. You know, and all five of us can meet with him individually and give us our, you know, spiel on whichever policy. I'm not so sure that helps him. You know, how does he, if, you know, you and I are just at polar opposites or whatever on that view, how does that help him in the process? I mean, my view, understanding the difference between being a part of the executive, which I've been, and this is more sort of a pseudo executive legislature, is to basically, okay, this is the chance to have the policy discussion or the different perspectives. When the staff comes to us driven by the goals of the city plan, you know, this is what we were tasked to do. This is on the strategy and priority lists, you know, keeping in mind what the city plan is. This is how we think we're addressing it. And then it allows us to have a public discussion and a discussion, as Tim was saying, that allows other people to come in that sometimes brings in factors that none of us thought of, and ultimately we need a perspective. So part of it is perhaps maybe.
But having the input from you and me, if say we're polar opposites, in Paul's doing his work, there's the potential that in that conversation, either he sees something that he hasn't already seen that addresses both of our needs, or he's aware of what that intention is as he's putting together his presentation. So I don't want to waste his time because he is a very busy guy And I hesitate reaching out often because of that. But I also know that the more informed he is about the policy direction that we are all trying to see implemented, the greater the potential that when he brings something forward, he's gonna get 4 or 5 head nods rather than 1 or 2.
And I think that, I mean, we're a different body than obviously the House and the Senate, other legislative policy bodies, but there is typically a lot of this behind the scenes work on policy issues that's done before it's made public. Right, that's a very, very typical process, which we don't really have here, at least among us in council for the most part.
I don't know. City, what is more, if the goal is to be efficiency,
I'd love to
let's
hear some
ask,
feedback from
what
these
is
guys.
more
I
efficient?
just
I
want to
mean,
ask Andrew one question.
Yeah.
So like for example, take the electrical and fire safety inspection proposal, right? In your mind, what would have been the more nimble outcome?
No, as I said, that worked really well because to Steve's credit, he reached out, we had some great conversations.
If you hadn't had the conversation, how would it, do you think it would have gone less nimbly?
I do think so, yes, I think the conversations in public, we've been really awkward and slower and yes, and maybe not as good a result, yes, I do think so.
And what was different because of the way you presented it, because of that? A lot.
So can I respond to some of this? And then I do want you to talk. So just stepping way back for a minute, I think this is like governance 401 that you guys are doing. Like, this is an excellent conversation. And I think a lot of city councils in Vermont don't have the time or the brain power to kind of battle with what you're battling with right now. You absolutely are a policy board. Your charges are financial oversight, ordinance oversight, and managing me. Those are the only real things you all do, right? I think the nimbleness is interesting. A ton of work goes into everything that's behind you, much like Senator's staff does a ton of work behind, like we are both functioning as you, ideally, we are functioning as your staff, not an executive staff that's separate from a legislative branch, but in tune. So I just want to acknowledge that. I think that what you're grappling with is governance process versus politics. And this is where I want Steve to jump in. Like, Steve called you because we knew you were gonna be pissed off about stuff, that kind of stuff, and he wanted to manage your reaction about it. I mean, sorry,
That's
and he
good.
is incredibly good at the politics of it. We can do that more. We have been hesitant to do that because of equally treating all 5 of you when you're 5 very different humans. We certainly can do that more, especially around ordinances. I think projects I'd like to talk to about on a different vein. But Steve, you talk.
So working in Burlington and under not a manager form of government, there was the expectation that the department head was gonna head off problems by talking with the counselors that you would know were passionate about an issue before it got to council, right? Someone, I must say, grease the skids. This is completely political, right?
Yeah.
So as we're building out this ordinance, I know Andrew's gonna bring up some points that I'm not gonna be prepared for. And so if I can have this conversation in advance of it, and not that Elizabeth's concerns aren't as important, but I suspect I can probably get there. I probably will never get there without, if Andrew is completely opposed to this, then I'm never gonna get the votes, cause I'm probably, your Lori's gonna fall have a similar concern. Right, so this is politics 101 for a department head. I'm working on an issue right now that I said, what did I say to you this morning? Can I talk to Mike? I think Mike's gonna wanna weigh in on this before it comes to everybody else. I'm okay with that, but I don't know that but we're a different form of government, right, with a manager, and I don't know that our department heads are prepared for that. I think we can help get them there, and certainly on ordinance things. But it is somewhat the department head reading the room, knowing what people are really passionate about, and making sure you're seeking out that advice. And I'm not, like, if I disagreed with you on what you wanted for policy, what I thought was best policy,
Bring
then
that
I,
to council.
then I have to bring it to,
Of course.
I'm not gonna make any change and I'm gonna bring it to council and see where the votes go.
Yeah.
But if I think that it's something that doesn't make a big difference and gets us to the same place quicker, cause I am about efficiency.
But what you're calling politics, I call sensible management. Because we want to get to yes, and Andrew's passion probably has some really good perspective behind it. And getting that when you're going through the process, that's speeding the process. That's getting us to yes faster. And nimble is about getting to yes so that we don't have to go through 3 extra warned meetings to get to the result that we want.
I think the reason I call it politics, is that it if we take this to more of an extreme, what we start caring about is 3 votes, right? Like, we just start caring about, okay, so if we can get Andrew, we get Lori, if we get Lori, we probably get Tim and we're done. And we don't really need to worry about everything else. And that's not how we operate. We are always gonna operate about, you know, coming to getting the community to feel like through the council, we have consensus on something. That's why it's taken to an extreme, it becomes politics rather than good governance. But I think that there's a middle ground that if you all, the 5 of you say, let's try this for a while and see how it goes. I think there's a middle ground where Steve and I can spend time thinking about upcoming agendas and thinking about who of you we think might be concerned about things, or you can spend time in the agenda planner and look at what's coming up and say, to me, I want to talk about this in advance, and we can do that. And ultimately, I do think we need to have the debate in public.
Yes.
I think we
If there are
can
issues that
bring you
people
drama.
disagree about, or potentially those things need to happen in public, absolutely.
And I just want to, in terms of the politics piece, hunting for 3 votes, I hope that all of us stay away from that headset.
Right.
And I may disagree with Andrew on something, and I may disagree with Mike on something. But my goal sitting here is to try and find the spot that really addresses, that finds the kernel of commonality, that if I had my way, we'd get to 5-0 votes 90% of the time. I know that won't happen, but I don't want to think that, Steve, you're talking to me to get a vote so that this goes through, rather than looking at how do we get the best result for our community. And sometimes I'll be happy and sometimes Andrew will be happy, or hopefully we'll all find that commonality in the process.
So to address your concern, ultimately it comes down to the individuals, right, and the professionals. And you guys are really professional, and I know that you're looking to do the best thing for the community. So you have these conversations with us, you still have to make a decision. What's the best objective thing for the community? Notwithstanding any feedback that I might give or anyone in, right? And I know that you're gonna do that because you're professionals. And so that's how you address the concern that you're articulating.
I guess I start with the operating presumption that what you have just stated is when they present to us, since they are the professionals, they're the experts, I do not ascribe to be an expert or better informed on any issue that we cover here that is in staff, because that's what they do full time, is that what they are presenting to us is this notion of what is best for the community. And also having sort of read the room, is this gonna basically get us to a decision that works for the community on its own? And so I'm assuming that's already baked in there. And so I'm not so sure if this talking with us, maybe
I
he
think-
says it will, but maybe you're saying it does, and I'll defer to that. But also, I also know that in life, people figure out how systems work. And if you basically say that, wow, I have a certain preference or a certain view, and the more I express that preference or view, the more likely that I'll get a phone call from Steve,
Yeah,
you know.
I hope.
And I don't know, I mean,
Is that good or bad?
I want to
is
challenge.
that good or bad? I
I want
don't
to
know.
challenge one thing you said though, Mike. These guys are incredibly talented and they know more in their little finger than I will ever know about how to run a city. But that doesn't mean that you don't have thoughts and ideas and perspectives that they haven't considered.
Right, and this is the
And
opportunity to share
How
that.
to, how
I'm
to
not
get
so
those,
I'm happy to test it, but I'm not so sure it will, you know, you're somehow we're suggesting that everything is gonna be condensed, time is gonna be shorter. I'm not sure it is, I'm going to say it's gonna be the same or more, but.
I
I'm
just
willing
want
to
the best
test anything.
result.
Yeah, I'm not debating that.
So is there a communication gap? Like after you had that conversation, are there things that you wanted to tell the rest of the council that what was coming before the meeting?
No, not necessarily. No,
So
no,
that
I didn't
pro-
think there was
that
any
process
gap
worked.
with that. I think that process worked really well.
No, but you had a conversation and you learned a bunch of stuff, right? And the thing is that we didn't have that conversation. So is there a communication gap there where if we had learned what you learned, that it
No,
might
I
have
think
helped
that
us?
when the chief presented it, he presented.
All those items were talked about. I think the difference is,
You learned everything that I,
yeah, I think
I mean,
Yeah.
we just saved, you know, Andrew would have had a half hour of additional questions that you all talked about, but
Okay.
we talked about it in greater depth with Andrew, knowing he would be very passionate
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
And so I think the information is still disclosed.
Yeah.
It's just, we were able to have enough conversations to get him to someplace comfortable that saved us an hour on Monday night versus,
Yeah.
you know, Tuesday morning.
Well, that's the nimble part right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you want it on their part to tell us?
well, I'm
I-
happy with what Jesse suggested.
Yeah.
I
As
think
a
it
way to
goes
go
both
forward.
ways, yeah.
Yeah.
Or like a future dashboard, not a real dashboard, but.
I
just
think
a-
you have all these
We
documents,
already
quite
have these
frankly.
documents.
I think, you know, this is part of why I send you the agenda planner, which I know is cumbersome. I look at it all day, every day, so it's easy for me. You know, if you see something on there coming up that we haven't proactively asked you to be engaged in, that you don't know what it is, or you want more information, you wanna have a conversation about, let us know. I think in terms of the projects, and now I'm kind of linking back to that, ordinances, I think, are much clearer about this because they are big, heavy policy documents, and the point is your opinion, not our professional expertise, but more your opinion. I think on the project side, that is more the policies and strategy that we've never, or if you tell me if you have a different perspective, I don't feel like we've ever launched a big new initiative that you didn't know about in advance. Certainly my,
I was talking
my,
about ordinances.
sorry?
I was talking about ordinances.
You were talking about ordinances, but
in terms of projects, the one that, I felt like through its process, it would have been helpful to have opportunity for input was the, active transportation plan. And the active transportation plan, as it ended up, did not meet my expectations. And there wasn't a time during the process, up until the very end, to have input on that and to find out my expectations are unrealistic, or they hadn't been part of the conversation and they made sense and they should have been. So it just felt like, by the time it came to us, that there was a public meeting that I went to where I first was like, okay, there's a piece missing here from my perspective. But there wasn't, it didn't feel like there was a place to insert into that. Logically.
so,
And so had there been an opportunity, here's what's coming down the pike. Take a look at it, and if you have questions or thoughts about it, get back to me. There wasn't the get back to me opportunity. And I didn't proactively say, I got a problem with this, I'm gonna go jump into the mess somewhere. It would be nice if that opportunity existed in the process. Does that make sense?
it does make sense. I mean, I think that was a project that was on the policies and strategies. That was on there before you joined the council, so fair point that you
Yeah.
were jumping on a moving train on that one. I think we could think about how we use the policies and strategies time together and follow-up time together to better define what you all are looking for out of something. And that was one that the bike ped committee was spending a lot of time on, so
Yeah.
to the extent that you all are interested in specific efforts like that, that you feel like I don't think we have 3 master plans going on right now, like, we're never gonna be able to spend time at council meetings brainstorming about what should be in
Of
those
course.
plans. I think that is where our committees and our advisory groups
Absolutely.
spend a lot of time, so feel free to involve yourself in those conversations. I think that's a little bit going
Yeah.
back to what you were saying about other groups.
Let's move on to another.
I'm sorry, I have another piece to my role of counsel, so I'll make it quick.
Go ahead.
So it again goes back to nimbleness, so,
We're at 45 minutes. Just so you know.
these,
Till 3 o'clock.
but these are valuable discussions.
I know, but you've got 3 other counselors there that have items, and we're never gonna get through it. But go ahead.
I'll come back.
Okay, we'll come back. Elizabeth, what's yours? Sorry.
Okay, I am gonna bring up a topic that isn't on the list, only because we recently discussed it. But I think it's important, because we did have this discussion at our last retreat. We have now had an opportunity to see the housing targets associated with the CRPC, whatever the acronym is, I can never remember. But I know we had some discussion about a lower growth model. And then we have the city plan at 1.5% to 2%, I believe. And as I listened to that presentation and thought more about it Monday, I really feel like it would not be a mistake I know there was some discussion around, are we letting an outside agency dictate our housing targets? And I actually feel if we model something in terms of all the ramifications of what we would go to the state with in terms of what our needs are and how to support growth, it should be, the city plan is the document that sort of, to me, defines a lower end at 1.5. And I think the CRPCC at the mid target is at 2.3 on the high end. The period of time on the city plan, I think, is 8 years, effective, or it was 2024. And the regional plan is a 25-year plan, I think, with no teeth at all in that upper limit. So I really felt like, particularly based on work on the housing committee, and we have a big gap in terms of what's next for the housing committee in terms of if there will be a strategic plan or master plan down the road there. That's not within the charge right now for that group, but I do feel like recognizing the needs, recognizing that we've got some guardrails in the city plan and the regional plan, that if we do modeling, and it should be in that 1.5% to like 2.5% range for us to understand what the implications are for our services, for infrastructure, for schools. And I don't think it's a bad thing to use housing as a barometer for assessing all those other areas. And we've got some rationale that is easily explainable to the community. And I think we'd have better luck getting a working group together quickly with those targets in place and leveraging those as sort of, what does it mean in terms of implications? And I do think there's some advantage to, I think you said it, Jesse, really not necessarily being first, but being well thought out to be able to go to the state to say, hey, we're on board with this regional plan, and these are the housing needs assessment for Chittenden County, but we're gonna be first in line to say, this is where we'll need support to even start to directionally approach these targets. So that's kind of what,
Go to the state
Top of
and ask
mind
for
for me.
what?
pardon me?
Ask them for what from the state?
it might be support for capital construction, it
Mhm.
might be,
School, wastewater, water.
it could be infrastructure, it could be service expansion, I don't really know, but I guess that point is, it's a pretty well-defined, there's a rational thought process around that range that could kick off those
Should
discussions.
the state offer money in addition to their new housing targets? until 2030?
Exactly.
Not yet.
That's the point.
That is the
That's
point,
next-
yeah.
That's the intention of I think the state next is we don't know what those are until we know where what the communities need, where the housing is going.
So what you're talking about, Elizabeth, really ties into our conversation about growth
Yeah,
management.
exactly, yeah.
And the comments I had about the plan, when it was presented about how does this relate to where the growth is happening and to dwelling units per acre and how we do this. All of that ties into the issues you're talking about as well. And the more we hone in on that and get really clear about how we want to direct this process, we'll have a much better idea of how we can make sure the services are in place and that the costs associated are appropriately allocated.
So are we asking at different growth rates, where are the trigger points for needing new X, new Y, new Z, right? Is that
Yeah, it's really
You know.
at those two ends. of the
right? Do
continuum.
we know it?
With a broad time frame, by the way.
Yeah.
It's,
Right. But do we know basically where those trigger points are? Like if we grew housing by 15% over the next X years, we definitely would need, an expansion of airport park wastewater, or, could CWD keep up with demand? Just put a second tank in not too long ago, right? I mean, there's schools, right? We already have a declining population. So does that population stay pretty much level, or does it grow a little bit? I mean, are there models for that already? Do we know?
I think we have anecdotal ideas of that, but I
Yeah.
think what Lori and Elizabeth are suggesting is a more intentional, data-driven, thoughtful discussion about that between staff and council or a community group or an advisory group, and hopefully in partnership with the school and blah, blah. I think off the cuff, I think we could answer some of those questions,
Yeah.
but they wouldn't be done as well as we could do with
Exactly.
data and with partners.
But if
And
we-
different development strategies will have different impacts.
And I would just add, and different revenue generating strategies will also say, how
Well,
do
then-
we manage that?
Yeah.
I think they're all connected. It's a
Absolutely.
holistic approach is what I think we're all advocating for, instead of just looking at one sliver of the pie.
You had a graph, you got 3 growth rates, right? And then you also have 3 demand rates for services, and then you have tripwires where it says you reach this point, boom.
Right, but you also have,
You have a
Or there's-
property tax, income,
and how can we
Line
affect that property tax income? How can we grow it in a way? Or how can we affect the local option tax, which is something that, hopefully we're doing in terms of both split and hopefully getting eyes on the information. So basically, how do we empower ourselves as well to have more sort of agility and flexibility and scope of possibility?
and I think we were starting to see, through Paul's presentation, sort of where those corridors would exist and also how they fit within the, it was really enlightening to me to see South Burlington then pan out a little bit, because
Yeah.
it's hard not to think just of South Burlington, but,
It's in context.
yeah, and when I first heard that target, I was sort of blown away and thinking, it was unreasonable. And then as I started to hear more, I sat through the planning commissions, Kelsey presented at the housing committee, so started to see how even city staff were talking about it. And again, it's a fairly long runway, but I do think there is some value to, it's a little bit like, I think we could spend a lot of time talking about how to get to a target, but I just don't see any downside to say we've got 2 documents that have targets in them. Use those as the guardrails, and then we can start to actually build the other work around it. And again, there's not a commitment on on the
And if
regional
we,
piece.
if we hit those targets, what we're gonna look like when we get there.
Right.
So, somebody's ringing.
Sorry, I don't think this.
Before. So I think, I don't mean to cut off this conversation, but we are actively working on an update to that growth management memo that we gave you for your last retreat.
Yeah.
And I think it is fairly in line to what you're suggesting. I'm not completely sure when we will be ready to bring that back to you, but I think it won't be in 6 months. It will be within the next 4 meetings or so.
Right.
So I think we are actively working on exactly what you're saying.
And would that also have the strategies for revenue, different options for revenue growth?
So what we're gonna bring back to you is not a growth management plan. What we're gonna bring back to you is, somebody said it earlier, how do the 5 of you get on the same page about what the direction to us is
Yeah.
on what a growth management,
Which will.
how we
include
do a
revenue.
good growth management process.
Yeah.
So that,
Thanks.
including revenue generation, absolutely. Have you guys done any reading on Urban 3? Does that mean anything to you?
No,
So Urban 3 is a consulting firm that I'm not saying we're definitely going to use, but to Mike's point about revenue generation, they are well versed in thinking about how different development patterns impact revenue generation in community. And I think that that would be both to Lori's point about like what type of growth we're going to see.
Yeah.
And Mike's point about the revenue we will see as a result of that type of growth. I think that could really help shape the conversations.
so Urban 3 is a consulting group.
Consulting group, they did a bunch of work with Burlington.
So that all makes sense. I mean, I think I articulated last time, I probably would want to model. In my mind, the city plan is kind of our mid, like this is our target for the city, right? And then we've got these new, much higher growth targets from the county. So we've got a mid, a high. I would personally want to see a low, but I hear you. That'd be my perspective.
Everything.
They're good?
Next.
You're next.
I'm next.
Hell.
So I'll sort of, the one I'm gonna jump on relates a little bit to what Andrew was talking about. It's a little different.
And you can't go back to that.
No, we're not going back to that. This is, so we're going on.
Roundabouts.
Roundabouts.
No.
You know, we get,
I think it.
that one's, I think that's on
All
there.
in.
Communication between city committees and planning office and the DRB. And it ties back to what Andrew's talking about in terms of who has input where and how. And I'm in total agreement that when something gets to master planning process in the DRB and it's moving forward, that the planning office and our ordinances that we have created are what should be dictating the way the DRB moves forward on a project. But when a project first comes into the planning office and it's pre-sketch plan or it's going to sketch plan, I think it would be incredibly valuable for our committees that are policy or are experts in many ways about specific items, whether it's the NRCC or the Bike Ped Committee or the Parks and Rec, that at the very early stages of the project, when it comes into Paul's office, that a memo gets sent to each of our committees for them to be able to have input into the concept. And the reason I'm saying that is Paul knows our ordinances inside and out. He has the planner's perspective on things, but he doesn't necessarily look at it through the eyes of an arborist or through the eyes of a active transportation person, et cetera. And at that early planning stage, I think that input from those committees could inform and improve, give the developer information that they can incorporate into their plan to get the best plan possible coming forward.
I'm gonna stop you there. And as a former member of the DRB.
Yeah, I was a DRB member too in Shelburne.
Right, so Sketch is the first time that plans are shown in public to a statutory committee.
Yeah.
And the public is allowed to weigh in a little bit on that as well.
Yep.
And oftentimes, right, feedback is solicited from, or there is an order or request made for the developer to go seek, feedback from a particular committee.
Yeah.
I have a feeling, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when Paul is with the developer and they're talking about a possible sketch plan, I'm not sure they want that to be made public at that time. When it comes in for sketch, you have plenty of time for the committees to go interact with that developer and get answers and make suggestions and look at bike paths or whatever. I never had a feeling that, there wasn't enough time after a sketch came in.
When I was on the DRB in Shelburne, when a project was before a project came to sketch, or when it was coming to sketch, there was a request for feedback from each of the committees on the project. So that at sketch, if it was appropriate, and sometimes before sketch to help them get to sketch, if the developer wants that, the input is solicited, not into the legislative part of, does this meet our ordinances or not, but before that. So that there's the opportunity, hopefully, to refine and improve project before it gets to the DRB, to the master plan stage.
But that's the purpose of filling in a sketch initially, right?
I
is to start
understand,
that
but-
feedback process.
But in Shelburne, there was a direct link asking for that feedback from committees. My understanding in conversation with you, Jesse, is that our committees are supposed to interact with the council to make the ordinances and have the ordinances in place, but they're not supposed to be interacting in the planning process because the ordinances are supposed to control that. And did I outline that correctly from our conversation?
With an additional sentence that the DRB has a policy in place that they can always ask a specific committee for feedback. Like, yes, and.
I'm on the Parks and Rec and the NRCC committees, and they're often saying, what are the projects that are coming up? And it would be ideal if there could be a way for there to be information shared so that they know when it would be appropriate for them to look at a project or not. And
So they need to see the agendas for the DRBs in advance and know that there's a new sketch coming? Is that, because they want to have somebody there to see it? Is that?
no, it's more, our committee members are all volunteers and they're doing what they're doing. They don't necessarily look at every DRB agenda and see what's going on. If there's a project that's coming up that is going to involve parks or public space or something like that, that a note gets sent to the chair of the committee just saying, this project is in the works. It would be great to get some feedback from you.
At sketch.
Well, pre-sketch. So Laura, in Shelburne.
At
when-
sketch or
When it
pre-sketch.
was pre-sketch, what was the developer's reaction to that process? Was it something they appreciated? Was it viewed as cumbersome or not wanted? Like, how did that all work out?
For the most part, developers are trying to bring forward a plan that's gonna have the least resistance. If they get feedback from the constituents that have, I mean, it's nice to think I'm gonna put it through and nobody's gonna see it and it'll get approved and I can build it and I don't have to worry. But the more transparency there is when that goes forward, they get the input, there's the opportunity to figure out how to address what's gonna be coming at them anyway and incorporate it earlier in the plan rather than trying to figure out how to fit it in further down the
So I'm still
road.
trying to get to the point there. Are there specific instances where a sketch plan was presented at DRB in South Burlington and there was no input solicited from a particular committee? Or they felt blindsided that this project has been proposed and?
No, in South Burlington as a committee liaison,
Yeah.
I've had an unclear message about how to direct the committee's engagement in the DRB process. And the sort of feedback that I've gotten is the committee should be staying hands-off unless request is solicited. But there are a number of projects that come forward where those committees might appropriately have input. And is there a way to make it so that works more efficiently?
What was the process in Shelburne? Did someone in the planning and zoning have discretion if they thought maybe this would be something a committee would want to weigh in on? They would invite the chair into a particular project pre-sketch, like how?
I don't know the full process, but when there was a project, requests were sent out to the committees and the committees would submit a letter
Pre-sketch.
that would be at sketch. That would say, we've reviewed this and this is our input.
So when sketch was,
So when sketch was presented, each of the committees had reviewed what had happened, and at sketch that review is, so the DRB has this information and says, the Bike Ped Committee thinks that it would be really appropriate for this project to be connected to this bike path.
So I'm still, go ahead.
Sorry, can I lift us up for a quick
Sure.
second here? So I think, so you and I have a very different perspective on this, and we've talked this out before.
Yeah.
I think to me, the question for the council is, do you want to be perceived as kind of development friendly and enabling things to happen, or do you want to be seen as more constrained on development? I think what you were, and Paul and I have had this debate a number of times, like there's kind of two philosophical ways to approach to regulation. There's through the regulations, we negotiate as much as we possibly can for the residents of South Burlington or our personal perspectives on a project. Or there's a regulatory approach that says, we are gonna be very clear in our policy documents about what our vision for our community is, and then give developers, as long as they develop to that community vision, there is a streamlined way to get there. And I think those are two, I think what you are suggesting is becoming much more constrained in our development. Because if we start adding policy committee reviews to a regulatory process, as opposed to policy committee reviews into the development of the regulation and the official maps and the zoning and the ordinances, we are gonna create much more development uncertainty for the developers. And cost time and money and consultants and whatnot to go through all of those things, as opposed to be very clear at the outset what we want developers to be building to the community vision in our city.
So I see it a little differently than that.
Yes, you and I see that very.
No, but I mean, I don't see it as being restrictive or I don't put it in those two camps. I see that if a policy committee has the opportunity to provide positive feedback early on in the process, that the developer ends up with a better process that can get through the project, through the permitting process in a more streamlined way.
But there's a
So I
big,
would say that on the regulation side of it, the policy committee should be advising what the LDRs say we want in our community that you then adopt. And then assuming a developer develops to that, they're smooth sailing through the process.
But just to balance back to that, when Paul is talking to a developer about a project and he's looking over the project with them, he's looking at it from a regulatory standpoint. And he's saying, this dots all the i's and crosses all the t's, you're good to go. He doesn't necessarily have the perspective of one of our policy committees that may look at it and say, this crosses all the dots and i's and dots all, whatever. But if you consider X, Y, Z, it'll actually enhance it.
So that becomes a negotiation point with the developers. And
yeah,
just to be clear, this isn't just Paul unilaterally measuring to the LDRs. This is, our permitting process includes our engineers, our arborists, our professionals saying, here's what's in the standards there in the LDRs. Does this design meet that?
I think so I hear what you're saying, I understand, but I think there's plenty of opportunity once it's presented at sketch. And the thing that bothers me is I wouldn't want a committee member in that room initially with planning and zoning and the developer when they're trying to hash out how this thing should start to look before they can finally get a full sketch plan out. Because they're already going through, like she said, all the regulatory requirements, right?
Yeah,
And there's stuff in there that's going to include things that the committees are gonna want. What's gonna happen though, is that when it comes out to sketch, somebody from the committee is gonna go, that path should actually go over there because we know that people use blah, blah, and we connect better, right? So it's just like a finesse nuance thing that happens.
and when does it, I'm saying, when does that finessing happen?
That happens after the sketch has been presented at the DRB, right? And somebody says, I think you should get some review from, NRCC or from Bike and Pet about that specific path, because we know something. And then the DRB can say, tell the developer, you should go talk to these people.
So is it incumbent, what I'm trying to find out is it incumbent on the NRCC or the Bike and Ped Committee to be watching sketch plan and seeing when something goes to sketch and showing up to be there? Or is there a system where they can be made aware that this project is now in sketch?
Well, the packets are out ready, how far in advance for packets for
Week.
a week? So
Is
is
it
there,
a timing issue in the sense that committees meet once a month? Right, sketch DRB notices come out a week, whatever, before, so it's likely the case that for
I'm
the
just-
most part, the committees wouldn't have an opportunity to meet to review the sketch.
well, they don't have to
between-
meet to review the sketch. Somebody just from the committee has to go look at the sketch and maybe bring it up with other
Well,
committee
they've
members
talked
and say,
about, in the committees, when do we review a project?
So I think it's, sorry, Lori, to interrupt, I think it's that's the issue. This is a changing the definition of the work of your policy committees. This is not, other than the intentional request of the DRB to a committee, this has never been an expectation that committees do this kind of regulatory oversight. So they are wanting to do a piece of work that you so far have not asked them to do.
Because it's over and above the LDR.
They've
Would be
been,
over and
they've
above
been
the other.
asking for that, and is there a time? So all I'm saying is a project is getting ready to go to sketch. I think it would be appropriate for a notice to go to the committee saying this project is going to sketch. If you want to review it, this would be the time.
Jesse, your perspective that throughout Vermont, it's not typical or be atypical or inappropriate for policy committees to have that role?
I think policy committees' roles are to advise you on the policy that's in the LDRs. And that it's staff's roles and the DRB's roles to assess whether a development meets that policy definition as ascribed by the council. I think this creates development hurdles. And it's a hard thing to advocate against because those committee members just wanna be in the know about what's going on in the city, and that's totally understandable. I think if we're gonna allow 130 people to be now overseers of every development project, in addition to the 15 staff who are already overseers of the development effort and the DRB members, that's gonna create a real,
But is it possible to see it instead of as a hurdle? To see it as an opportunity for the developer? That's what I'm trying, I don't.
see it as that, I see it
But
as a
in
hurdle.
Shelburne, the policy committees were charged with that oversight, or charged with that participation.
They were charged with that participation and for the most part, there was not resistance from developers around it. And a developer can say, thank you for the input, I'm not paying any attention to it, I'm meeting the code, I don't have to do anything.
That would be my concern is you solicit the feedback and choose not to implement it.
Well, the developer can always do that. But if they get the feedback, there were numerous times where they went, oh, this improves my project. It improves my project, it makes it easier for me to get through the review process, and it ends up being a win-win. But it's not like they're coming in saying, you have to do this. It's coming in saying, have you thought of, or these are issues that we see that may be appropriate for you to take into consideration when you move from sketch to master planning. And I would advocate for it. If it's not happening, I will be really clear with the committees, but for the last year, this conversation has gone on and they've said to me, what do we do? And I'm like, well, or they're like, which projects do we review? And I'm like, I'm not sure that you're supposed to be doing that. So there's a lack of clarity, and I'm not sure if there's a solution that makes it so that
Well, I mean,
it could actually be a win-win for the developer and for the committees.
So, I mean, their residents, they can go look at the packet a week in advance if they want to, and if they want to go attend the DRB, they can.
And as individuals, I
And they can
understand.
raise their hand and say, have you thought about X, Y, Z, if they
Yes.
want to.
no, they
Yeah.
can, Tim, but
Yeah,
that's
they
the
can.
question for
Yeah.
us. What's the proper
But the
role?
I
question,
don't think anything's broken right now, because oftentimes they get asked to comment on sketch plans so that the developer gets the right feedback, and then they put it into their, final plan.
It sounds to me like the committees think it's not working as well as it can.
Yes.
So in terms
Well,
of
what
broken,
result is there out there as proof that they feel like that something, they weren't consulted enough so that it came out wrong? What?
I don't know that there's any of that, Tim. I'm just saying that in the meetings,
Yeah,
the conversation comes up.
yeah.
well, you don't know because they didn't have the opportunity.
No, they do have opportunity.
No,
They
but
go
not
to
as
sketch
committees.
plan in public with
No,
a
but-
statutory committee.
It's
Yes.
a different process. And I'm not advocating one way or the other.
The
but it's a
committee,
different process.
particularly the NRCC committee, and maybe the concern is that they're a more restrictive committee, but they have talked about wanting to look at the plan as a committee and just say, is there something that would improve this? And have the opportunity to share that. So what I'm hearing, unless the council says otherwise, is that's not the role of the committee. And when that conversation comes up, I can just shut it down and say, that's not your role. As an individual, you can go to sketch. That's up to you, but this committee is not charged with, unless the DRB specifically sends a request to the committee.
Like, they can always look at the packet in advance, and somebody can attend the meeting and raise their hand and say, as a member of Mike and Ped, I would recommend X, Y, Z, right? And then that goes into the record and is feedback for the developer at that point.
Well, they should just be doing it as an individual.
No, but they can go as a representative of the committee.
No,
and
they
say-
can't do that if they haven't talked about with the committee.
No,
But it's just feedback at sketch. Their sketch plan has no regulatory authority and no legal basis.
but if I speak,
They represent the committee.
if I speak out,
Bob Britt came to meetings at DRB all the time and would say, sketch plan, have you thought about X, Y, Z? And they would go, oh, maybe we should ask that committee for feedback. It's all about soliciting feedback to get planning and zoning to tell the developer that they really should go talk to Mike and Ped.
So maybe the way to bridge this then is for one or two members of NRCC to maybe switch off and regularly review the sketches.
Yeah.
To be there then at the meetings, provide the feedback, if any, as Tim said, and then if there's something substantive, suggest
but there will
reach
not
out.
be, there will not be a communication network between planning and the committee or between DRB.
But if there's a
Unless
regular
DRB
process
solicits it.
with an NRCC member or by PED, knowing, okay, I'm charged with going,
Yeah.
to the meeting to review the sketch, and then at that meeting, I can suggest that the DRB solicit.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a way to bridge it.
It's fine.
Yeah, is that good?
Okay, first of all, the Bob Britt's name came up, I'm sure we all saw the email he sent, but I think that's more a point for the city, whether that can be adjusted or not, but it seemed to make sense. And the actual transportation, just quickly, I fully agree with Lori, but I'm just wondering if that's a challenge, as you pointed out, when you come on board, there are already policies in the work. and just something to just keep in mind, probably with, you know, new people like, hey, there's already stuff going on, and probably come up to speed. And Andrew had mentioned something about perhaps in our committee structure, when he talked about the active transportation. Should we bring in all the different parts of the active transportation under one committee? Because they seem to be alive, but I definitely subscribe to that. But the issue that I wanted to bring up was the first thing I put on my list, which was giving the measure, I'll just read it, given the emerging fiscal uncertainty, how does the city strategically prepare for a loss of resources or revenues? You know, mentioning the different sources that are possible, that are out there, and then some which may go away, and how do we strategically move forward with our highest priorities? You know, everything we've talked about, it's been great, and it's great that we're trying to improve efficiencies, and fully agree that when we achieve them, make them known to the public, because that's, you know, the public's purse. But my experience also on GMT, which thank you everyone for pointing to me prior to city council, it's been a great experience. But it was a perfect example of when revenues are counted on and they disappear, and just the incredible disruption it creates, and the challenges of basically trying to keep important services on track. And given the sort of uncertainty of the environment, and given the particular unique challenges that Vermont may face because of potential economic challenges with Canadian trade and our dependency on local option tax for Canadians coming down here and spending their good Canadian dollar down here. You know, but we felt luckily we missed the bullet, so to speak, on some of the federal grants, but I think going forward, they definitely redefine how money will be given out. And I know that we are very much built on accessing federal grants in certain areas. And so I'm just wondering, is it worth a discussion, or is it worth a briefing from the city staff on, you know, how do we create resilience? Because everything, you know, we do has been very important. The last two budget sessions have shown us that we've barely made the budget through very, you know, money that has gone away, which is the same thing that GMT is facing, the loss of one-off money that came from COVID, and also some very creative and efficiency improvements by the city, but I'm not sure where we're gonna be able to repeat those. So is that something that is, I mean, maybe I'm the only one who's concerned about that, but just wondering if people think that's worth a discussion, to have sort of a strategic plan on how do we address it. Hopefully the growth plan that we're talking about builds that in there, but I think the revenue component is gonna be super important in terms of confidence that it is there to not only maintain the great services that, you know, South Burlington has uniquely, I think, in Vermont, but also many of the ambitions that have been expressed around the table today.
So are you asking, does staff have a risk assessment for the impacts on all those revenue
Have
streams?
we look forward, and do we anticipate certain revenues, and have we figured out, given the changing environment? Because I remember when we talked about local option tax, for example, Martha said, oh, based on the past growth projections, you know, this is how it's gonna go. Well, what if those don't occur? What if we don't have the continued Canadian tourist? What I
They
mean.
pay in Canadian dollars, so it doesn't matter.
Well, our dollar, the ratio is getting better, but anyways, that's what I was just wondering. I mean, because my first impression in working in some capacity in Vermont was on GMT. I love it, great, incredibly committed people, great colleagues on the board, and it's been wonderful, but there had been a sort of a need to adjust things, and then the COVID money came along, they deferred adjusting things, and now the adjustment is even more painful, and it's a very scrambling, and as a result, you know, we're cutting and you know, sometimes in a challenging way, where had advanced planning in anticipation of perhaps losing this money or not depending on one-off money would have allowed us to sort of pivot in a more constructive way. South Burlington has been incredibly helpful in helping adjust this process, but I'm just wondering, do we need to do something with that given the current environment?
Can I just ask you, so
Sure.
what you're envisioning, is kind of forward budget projections, like
Yes.
doing an estimate for, say, fiscal 27, 28, 29? What are our needs? What are our sources? What do you think those sources are gonna look like? Is that what
Yes,
you're basically
absolutely,
envisioning,
absolutely.
forward budget
Forward budgeting,
projections?
so that
And a
we,
risk
We
assessment,
haven't done
risk
anything on that?
and a risk assessment around specific revenue sources.
because, you know, a lot of it is based on federal granting, and, you
Especially
know,
with a new guy.
And since we have this data management person, you know, is there a way for us to do that? Because having to adjust on the dime is very, very, I mean, just if we go back for a second to when we thought the grant was gone for the bridge across the highway. You know, wow, that was, you know, luckily.
But you can have a plan for that.
No, you can have a plan, but are there things that maybe we don't, maybe in doing this assessment is, oh, we have nothing to worry about, and even if there's a recession, we can keep it. I mean, I just think.
The question I have then,
Which-
like,
which
hey, look, I
funds are
mean,
risky?
big corporations do this all the time, right? You have all your scenario planning. It takes a massive amount of time to do, right? Because what are the scenarios? What are the things you need to think about? Most of those scenarios never come about, right? But, you know, that's how you husband your resources and make sure you have capital to meet the bad times, right? So obviously you can do it, but I guess the question I would have is whether we think our, you know, projections or our estimates or our thoughts about what will happen in the future are quite enough to make that process and the time and effort really valuable, or are we just kind of, you know,
I guess.
you know,
it's
in the wind too much and do all this work and, you know, because there's so much guesswork that it just doesn't really become a valuable exercise.
You know, fair question, and I guess this is why I said this is more a question to our city manager and is also, at least, you know, I've been only through 2 budget processes, the one that I sort of inherited and the one that we just went through. And, you know, to keep affordability out there was quite, as I saw it, a one-off, and I don't mean it because it was year-end money and basically a lot of creative financing on insurances and other things. Maybe I'm wrong, but going forward, especially if there's a drop in the economic a recession or just a drop in Canadian engagement here, you know, are we talking about all these great plans with confidence that, you know, we'll meet all the stability, you know, all the services we do, and we continue to ambitiously reach for the stars for other things. Maybe the growth management plan and the revenue will address that issue, but you know, that's my concerning question, is so we don't get caught off guard, as, to be quite honest, GMT did, and wow, you know, we've all seen the impact of that.
That makes most observations. So I think that there's a really interesting way for us to do some middle ground of this in the future. So one, I do want to make the point, I do believe for Vermont community, we are very well diversified right now. The fact that that our property tax revenues are a relatively low percent of our total revenue budget is impressive. Will shield us a little bit. We have a healthy fund balance that we didn't have, you know, 4 years ago that we have today. We have the ARPA money still in fund balance. We are not using one-time money for any operations costs. We are using one-time money for one-time projects or capital projects, which in the hard times is where we would first look to defer, find other things. So I think we have good structures in place to weather. I also think with the new software that does some of those has more projection ability, and with our new deputy finance director, who is a rock star, we will have a lot more capacity to do some of that projection. I think what the question will be is being really clear on what the assumptions are we want to project out. So to me, the uncertainty and like spending a whole lot of time modeling what if comes down to, you know, Vermont has been pretty insulated from past huge downturns. But what if local options tax goes down 5% because we don't have Canadian visitors, and what does that look like? Trying to come to logical, rational assumptions that could happen, as opposed to just like, you know, a quarter of our city burns down.
No.
Climate change is going to be so incendiary, no pun intended, but like not being wildly out of
And
things,
that's-
but just coming to a clear set of.
It's
So
kind
I
of the
think,
soft things that you worry about, like a large increase in unemployment, right? Which could affect property tax collections, and then also a huge drop in the stock market, which then affects the pension balance, right? which affects the ability of the pension, fund to pay out normally, right? Which is why we put $8 million in it back in 2011 because of what happened in 2009. Didn't mean it didn't.
Yeah, I think
you know.
those are the things, the other things I would add to that are, what if local option,
I
we
think
have
that's-
seen pretty significant
we-
local
we-
options growth.
And we've
What
been
if we
projecting,
don't see
yeah.
the same rates? I think one of the things I'm worried about this fiscal year, but even more so next fiscal year, is our permit revenue going down. I think construction is gonna slow down. We are already seeing that happen. What does that look like if we collect, $100,000 versus for $500,000? I think those are things that we could,
Yeah.
at the beginning of the fiscal year, mid-fiscal year, be using the new software, the new staff capacity to project out a little and look more into the future. I think that would be a wise.
And I wasn't asking for the stars, I was
Yeah.
asking that for, rational sense, cause if depending on how the projections go, it may affect the time and energy we put into other work and saying, we may need to park this on the shelf a little bit, and because these numbers are going in a different way. Again, back to the overall issue of efficiency, what is possible, what is realistic, and not just always focus on, in the ideal world, let's
We're
all.
also-
If you could do those projections with some realistic assumptions without a whole ton of staff time, that would be valuable.
That module, the software is not gonna be implemented until fall. And our new deputy starts in June, so we're looking at fall to get you,
Okay.
but I mean, this
It's
is
the right
the
Will you do those projections out a few years?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually a great thing because a lot of the uncertainty we're facing right now has to do with the change of administration, and we don't even know how it's settling out. There are court cases, there are all kinds of craziness happening. Come fall or early winter, I hope we're gonna have a little better idea of what the trajectory over the next couple of years will be.
Damage with Canada is probably done though.
What's that?
The damage with Canada is probably done.
I understand the damage with Canada is done, but I think looking at some of this now, but I think this fall, it will be incumbent on us to really look at how the economic landscape is shaping up going forward with the new administration. And at that point, we'll have a better idea of what we need to adjust.
And we'll be kicking off the FY27 budget
Yes,
process,
I mean,
and we'll be in
exactly.
eyes wide open to
Right.
Yeah.
that process.
There you go.
Yeah,
I think the public would respond well to the council having considered exposures and risk management and even broad categories of sort of this is what the forecast is saying or the plan, and these are areas we would go to in general.
Is that something you would want staff to present to us at a meeting?
I think I would wait until the person's on board and we
Yeah.
know what the software is
Yeah.
capable of, but
Yeah.
That would be an
I
update,
I
yeah.
would envision it
Okay,
to be some kind
eventually.
of presentation, but maybe it would follow another update like this.
Well, I think in connection with the FY27 budget,
Okay.
right, some
Okay.
scenario planning,
Yeah, yeah.
as you
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
some risk assessment would
Yeah, yeah.
be well received. I
yeah.
agree with that.
Oh, I was asking Steve to go,
She's gonna open them right now and send me a note,
Okay.
up, down, or sideways.
what I asked Steve to go look for is, we get quarterly, reports from the Vermont local options tax reports, and this week we should have gotten ours,
Yeah.
our last quarter in, which would be the first quarter of this administration, so I was looking if we could see where we are.
See what happened?
But just
If it's good, we know who gets the credit, if it's bad, we know who gets the credit.
keep in mind that as the pandemic started to take hold, right, and then people didn't go to stores at all,
Right.
right? Before that, like a year or so, Amazon had finally nailed down that all retailers, right, had to pay the 7%, on any purchase. And so suddenly Amazon picked up on all the missed local hotel, and drink taxes, right? And then it just grew from there. And it keeps increasing from what we've seen, right? So it's doing well. I guess that's the only thing I want to say. So that's, yeah. So I like that idea.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Tim had so many things in that list, didn't he?
Okay.
I got my list in a little bit late, but I'll just throw this out here. Affordable housing, And, you know, nobody, I don't think anybody knows how to build affordable housing without some nonprofit component. Just nobody can make it work, right? And so, and I've heard about projects that St. Albans is doing where the city works with a developer, works with a nonprofit, rehabilitates an old building, turns it into useful housing, right? And I just wanna know if there's a role for us to get involved in something like that. I would love for us to be able to find the money, and there, we have money. The question is, where could the money come from? To move a project, find somebody that has a project that they wanna build. And then not just pay from the housing trust fund for their permits, right? Not just, you know, help from a little bit of inspired, what was the term for the ARPA money? ARPA inspired funds, you know, for some energy efficiency, but actually get involved and help with construction costs, right? Something really major. And that's just a high ideal that I would like for us to somehow pursue. I don't know how to do that. But I know that if we have the will to do it, we can do it. And the question is, what do we have to do for voters? What do we have to do for staff? You know, where do we find a developer that has an idea? And that's all I wanted to say.
Affordable housing, having been a builder and developer most of my life, affordable housing is kind of an oxymoron. And the reason we don't do it is we're still building to the same scale, same size. And the materials and labor that go into a project very much define what that project's gonna cost. What do we do with, I mean, we're doing workforce housing and things like that, but how do we re-envision what housing looks like that can work? We used to have boarding houses. Boarding houses don't exist anymore. They're a way to provide affordable housing stock for a segment of the population that right now might be in tents. It's like, how do we re-envision what housing looks like or what housing is in ways that can put people in dignified, comfortable, efficient housing?
So I didn't want to have to define what that affordable means,
Yeah.
right? But it's just not market rate. That's what I mean.
I've seen, just to go St. Albans quite a lot, I find it a cute place, and I've seen exactly the projects you're talking about, and talked to people about that, and I think it's really impressive, but as you said, it was a commitment by the city to do it, so is that a charge we could give to the housing committee as an exploration in you know, and through their liaison, as well as through the city staff liaison, but you know, it would seem like, at least from my perspective, something to show our intent is, and our commitment is reflected by our actually doing initial studies and looking into it. I don't know what would be the most efficient way to do that.
I guess I'm not really understanding how you would want the city to get more involved. So I think that we have, you know, there are whole networks in Vermont that are stood up to finance affordable housing, whether it's through VHFA or the Community Development Block Grant Program or the tax credit program. I think, I don't think we as a city can compete in that market. We don't have the expertise, we don't have the money. I think that, you know, the things we can do is leverage the community development block grants like we did for the Summit properties at O'Brien.
And we have ARPA money.
And the ARPA money, like we did with Ho-Hum, you know, those kinds of things. What am I missing something in what you're thinking we could do?
It's just that it seems like St. Albans took a bigger role in participation
Right.
in that project.
And
And I think
driving
they
it
have
and
another
also
project in
funding.
mind too.
There are two projects.
And Rutland has a project in mind too. And I just,
So you wanna use the city's debt to build housing?
no, not there, well,
So that's what St. Albans is doing. They're
Oh, is it-
using
that's what
TIF
they're doing?
money
Oh, okay.
to build housing.
well, I don't know.
Or bonding.
I mean,
Yeah, they're bonding for it.
Is there any value
But the
to
taxpayers
looking at
on the hook.
models?
Taxpayers.
Yeah, but I mean, is this worth exploring and putting on the ballot? Is this something we as a city want to do to show that our commitment?
But they need to have a project to have that.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Or are they doing the bond like generically and then using it for those projects?
That's a good question. I don't know. They absolutely bonded for the TIF money. I don't know how that article was written, whether it was written with for this project on this space with this many units or to support housing. You know, I don't know how specific that got. I think if we want to explore this, that it should start with like some learning, and maybe it's the thing the housing committee looks at, like spend some time looking at how Dom Cloud did this very
I mean,
aggressive debt
It could
management.
be city land, right? City land and some city debt and whatever else is possible to build something.
I know that around the Longview property, when that process was going through, there was a lot of pushback about the city becoming a developer. And what you're
I
talking,
don't wanna be the developer, I just wanna be a participant. of
but
a larger-
the city getting involved in housing, there was
Mhm.
pushback about that. And I like the idea personally, but I'm also aware that there are voices out there that are,
There are always voices out there.
yeah,
Elizabeth, as the housing.
They don't live in affordable housing.
that's right.
As the housing liaison, is this something that you think your colleagues?
I mean, I think there'd be a lot of
interest.
interest. I think, as always, defining the scope of what you're charging a committee with is really important. And if it's benchmarking other models of city participation in affordable housing, that might be with guidance toward in-state Vermont and out of state or something. I think that could be something they would be pretty engaged in. Yeah, it sounds like it needs some investigation, so I do think there'd be a lot of interest in that.
I mean,
I think that's a good place to start.
there may be land, right, that some developer owns that he can't or she can't build on right now for whatever reason. And we might be able to buy it at a discount, right? Or something like that.
Hill Farms did.
835 Huntsford Road. Oh, jeez. Well, that, whatever gets built there is gonna have an affordable component. 15% at least, yeah. Whatever. But definitely they should go to sketch and then consult.
I heard you.
You heard me.
He is mocking me, I know.
I'm not mocking. I'm not mocking.
I felt it.
You know, so, you know, one opportunity could be heading for affordable housing. That's not something that I want to do, but you know, if somebody else is bonding for it, right, you know. Maybe it's not 1 penny, maybe it's $1. I don't know, I'm just kidding, but you know, that is a lot of money.
$1
A dollar.
Dollars make a lot of money.
100 pennies on that.
20 million bucks.
Anyway, that's all I had, because we've got 10 minutes left. Is there, we can't really, do you wanna go back to your list?
Well, do we have 10 minutes?
We have a hard stop at 3.
Sure, I actually, let me just shift gears for a second there, because I wanna pick up on something about the committees. The question is, and it goes back to role, so I know, like, when I was a liaison from NRCC, they have lots of ideas, and tree ordinance is one of them, and, you know, the question is, what are we charging these committees to do? Are they fleshing out the policy that we push down from the top? Or are they separately charged as committees to percolate policy up that we then consider? And I think it's ambiguous today. I think committees don't know exactly what it is they're supposed to be doing in that respect. I think we have a lot of talented people on these committees. We go through a lot of process in ensuring we have the right folks and that empowering them to come up with policy ideas and then percolate up to us is something that would be well received and would strengthen the committee structure, but I'm not sure I don't know what their role is, honestly. I think it's been ambiguous, so I want to throw it out there and see what people think their role is today and could we clarify it?
I think that's part of the frustration that I was talking about around permitting and around, what do we do? And if our role is so limited, am I wasting my time being here?
Yeah.
I don't have the answer.
So I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Okay.
So I think one of the failures of our system right now is that your current bylaws for committees, all they say about policy committees is that they are established by city council and serve as policy advisors to the council and at times the planning commission. And each has been established by a resolution of the city council that outlines a specific charge. So the resolutions that do exist are out there, but could be 10 years old, could be a year old, are disparate, are not kind of unified somewhere. And I think that it would help to pull those together. Maybe that's something we could do while we look at the appointment process. And I think that part of the role, I hope, of the council liaisons is to be directing down and inviting up. That I think that is, I know you guys spent a lot of time on that, and I think for staff, that has been a hugely, how you all have kind of leaned into those roles has been really valuable for us. But I don't think we've totally solved the problem of making people feel useful. I am shocked that committees don't come before the council. You know, I think that that's really interesting here.
Yeah.
And I don't really know
did
why
when
that
I was on the energy
happens.
committee,
Yeah.
and it was very valuable. I think we got a lot done, and maybe we just need to explain that to folks that, you know, you have that opportunity. And that's an empowering thing if you wanna grab it. I think people don't understand that maybe.
I certainly haven't been able to put that forward to the committees I've been on, and I know that the NRCC came forward to the planning commission and to the city council around a tree ordinance and felt like it didn't go well. And they felt demoralized and they're like, what do we do? So it's like, how do we empower them to do something, but also not shoot them down if they're doing something we don't want? And if they come forward, what are they coming forward to ask for? I mean, it's like as opposed to just coming saying this is what we're doing, what would be the intent of the NRCC coming to make a presentation to council?
Yeah, but I mean, I'm also thinking about the energy committee, right? There are lots of things I could think about the energy committee would be asking council to do, but they feel, I believe, that they're constrained by what we have on our, priorities list, and that they can't go outside of that box. And I didn't feel that constrained enough on the energy committee, because, a lot of good ideas do come up from the bottom, and should, I think.
But I think
there
they
is
should
that-
come up through the policies and strategies process. I mean, to me, that is the
Should they come
whole,
before the council?
But it,
well, that's what I'm saying, like, in theory, this month, the committee should be working on their recommendations for FY 26 that come to you as part of that process, and then you say, yes, please work on this
Come to
year,
council.
or don't work on it. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah,
and I
But I
think
don't think they feel empowered to do that.
but
Well, please help them feel more.
But it can't be one-offs in February and I think that has to be part of a plan, because otherwise, then you're put in a bind to wanna support them, but there's no funding for it. We haven't put the energy into laying the groundwork, which is what
thinking, I
this is.
fully agree with you that if we're gonna recruit and retain the good people we have, let alone more, there has to be a sense of outcome. Otherwise, why put in the time with, volunteers? I mean, but I think that there is that happy medium ground where they have to say that within this scope or within this time frame, we've asked you to come up with the process. I think the tree ordinance one, at least as I understand it, they went through all the work and then it was shown up and it was not accepted. So I think there has to be a sense of, you've gotten the green light to go down there and put in the time and energy.
Yeah.
This is from A to Z, you can look at it from A to L, and that's the acceptable scope, and find what is the best practice in there, I think. So, but I assume that this is what the process is. They come to us and say, this should be on the strategic plan, and if they get the yes, then they can, dive down into it, but there has to be, I
As opposed
fully
to diving
agree,
into it first.
instead of diving into it first and then, because then we will lose people. Well, like, why am I doing
Would it
this?
make sense to have like a meeting with the committee chairs
I think,
at some point where we talk about their concerns?
Yes.
We have this kind of thing and.
Yeah, I've done
Right.
that periodically, and
Okay.
it's interesting to me that it's not bubbling up, but we could absolutely, I mean, to be fair to them, I did it last year at this time, so it's not that I do it every 3 months.
sorry, could we do it in this kind of format too, instead of at a city council meeting where they're sitting in front of us, but more like heads of city and saying, do we all have a common chance to ask questions, raise their concerns? Because they may be things that we're just assuming of them, and actually, we're in a very different position than they do, if we like it or not.
So committee council retreat.
Yeah, committee council retreat, I think it'd be really good. I don't think they're feeling enough love, honestly.
I agree.
But what you mentioned, Jesse, I think would be really fabulous to get the charge statement, and have it be part of the, on the application for the different committees, or upfront, so that people know so that we know what the charge is for each of the committees.
And then the last thing on that, when we do look at the charges, and this is my note, I would love to, I would suggest we refocus energy to be energy and climate. And maybe move the active transportation stuff from energy to bike ped.
Yeah.
And then, I think the active transportation is all these different things. They're all related. I mean, that was the one thing that I think we all expected a little bit more of the report. But what the report was good is it looked at all the aspects of transportation, which is, I think, a must.
Sounds good.
Wow, another 2 hours.
Okay.
Finished 2 minutes early or 3, not sure.
Well, like I think this was really valuable.
Do we have any other business? Anything? Is it time for common roots to feed us?
Steering committee,
Okay, never mind. A steering committee, okay, that's right. When, now that's coming up in
June 4th.
June 4th.
you have, shall we count them right now?
Yes,
In June.
June, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Meetings.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 meetings.
Oh, it's 6. Well, that's great, not 7.
She's been a one person who's like, yes, stay my hour. Excellent.
Good.
We have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much for
Thank
coming.
you very much.
Constructive conversation.